It's a war out there. Everyone fighting for a cause, for their own nation. Of course people will die for their country. It's what we are, right? Soldiers to protect our nation, our homes and families. This is something that echoes through a time of human history. War. War is a common trait in us humans. Fighting for our own beliefs, our rights, defending our homes to fight another nation. We also heard the stories from our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, and great-grandmothers, right? But what if? What if war has a darker side? Something that we may never experience ourselves other than those who fought there. I'm a history nut and I enjoy all things history related, ranging from the first stone that was ever laid to build a home, and to large towering castles in the medieval ages, and to the French Revolution and to the first man landing on the moon. Everything that happens from centuries to now is part of history that we can tell the younger generation. My main impression was World War I and II, mostly because we still today have relatives who are still alive who can tell the tale of what they saw, how they felt, and the overall experience of being in war, and where various nations clashed into the battlefield. It's about 1300 hours in Celle, Germany. I and my father were visiting a very old relative for the day. I, of course, later joined my great-grandfather on a park bench where we went out for a stroll. The poor guy doesn't go out much ever since his wife died, so we popped by twice to check up on him. He wasn't always alone, of course, since a caretaker came by to make sure that he was alright. He usually stayed a few hours to watch over him and even slept overnight just to make sure. So he and I sat there on the bench in the park, just on the outskirts of the town center. A beautiful, remarkable place. The town itself was beautiful in its own way. Most of the buildings were quite old with a mix of wooden beams, almost like a fantastic Victorian area of Germany. Vibrant colors and clean even. We sat there for a few hours just to have a little chit-chat and to see how he's handling himself. When we are usually alone, I tend to poke him about his time in World War II. I wanted to know more from his experience and what the world was like during that time. Of course, there was something rather odd about how he had explained things to me. The specific part was about him fighting the Russians during the Battle of Stalingrad. We all know that the Battle of Stalingrad was nothing but a bloody massacre, because after all the Germans fought the Russians on their territory that the Russians knew well enough, just like how the Americans attacked the Japanese and were pushed back with decoy and ambush tactics. Every time I asked him about what had happened, he would just push the question away, as if he really didn't want to answer it. It really got on my nerves because this also piqued my interest, even more every time that he tries to reject it. The next time that we sat on the exact same spot, it finally happened. He finally spoke out about it, after all these years of prodding him about the question. And to be honest, it could have also been the annoyance because I would never let it go. And so we sat there. He eased back against the bench with a hefty sigh and he spilled the story to me. I know this is annoying, but I really wanted to know what had happened. I have read books during my history class and honestly, a lot of it doesn't give the bigger, detailed picture of what had happened. You fought there, you know what it was like. So please at least tell me. You are my only close living relative who ever fought the Russians. I really don't want to tell you this, anything but this. It took me years to get it all out of my mind. I was in agony every night just thinking about it. He sighed with a shiver. Look, if I tell you, it will at least stop you from pestering me with this, okay? He asked me sternly. Honestly, all I wanted to ask him was just his time in Russia. Nothing else, so of course, I agreed with him. Yeah, I just want to know, that's all. It's just that whenever I ask you, you just reject it. I know from what I've read it was fierce, but when I poke you about it, it's like something is scaring you from even telling me. With a slow, shaking nod, my great-grandfather leaned in, his hands held together as he stared down at the ground. We were stuck there, waiting for reinforcements from the Western and Eastern Front. Stalin was crazy, burning down his own villages and towns to stop us from resupplying with food and water, even shelter. We barely could survive the frozen landscape. Even our tanks began to break down constantly due to the frost. They weren't made for this winter. We had to use fires to try and thaw them out, just to get them to move again. It was so cold that our tank crews denied to ever enter one of their tanks again because of the weather. We thought that it would have been much warmer there than it was. We only found out that the 2 tank crews were dead. It was so cold overnight that 2 of our tanks were completely frozen and the hatches were sealed. So by the time that we had managed to break the hatches and try to rescue our comrades, it would have been too late. They were dead, their faces pale, almost frozen over with a state of shock. This doomed most of our morale. That's Jesus. I'm sorry. Most of the tank crew eventually called their tanks a steel coffin in winter, a driving death trap. We managed to move up a few days later when our platoon lead told us to pack up and move out. We were only a day's walk away from Stalingrad. We had been told that some of the other regiments were already there and ready to assault Stalingrad from shores. None of us were even ready for this kind of assault. Most of the men were hungry, thirsty and cold. The morale was almost non-existent, and some of the men wanted to just run off. I didn't blame them if they did. We had to shout at each other, poke ourselves with our knives to stay awake. Because if you fall asleep in the cold, who knows if you'll ever wake up. For some of you who may have already guessed, my great-grandfather was indeed a German soldier fighting the Russians. He was a part of the Wehrmacht. Just normal soldiers like every other nation's army fighting for their country, and for survival. Lucky for him, he was a sergeant, and so he had a group of men under his wing, which he trusted with his life. They all are comrades, brothers in arms. These people watched your back while you watched theirs. So how did you get in? Was it heavily defended? I asked him. Very, but when we arrived, we already saw the flashes of light illuminating the landscape. The loud thunder of our weapons and theirs clashing in the darkness, and dark smoky clouds radiating off the buildings like a factory chimney. We had to split up into groups to get in. The first group moved through the buildings to offer supportive fire on the ground troops, while I and my men moved down into the canals to sneak in. This was the best chance that we had to surprise them. At least that's what we thought. What do you mean? Were you expected? Not exactly. He muttered something, a hefty sigh emitting from his lips. The canal gave off a rather rancid stench. Not the stench you would be used to in the sewers, but a stench that was odd. How do you mean? Well, as we moved through the canal, we noticed that our boots splashed against the bottom of the canal's concrete foundation. There was water, but it was dark, murky, a reddish tinge to it all. And as we continued through, the stench became worse. We got to a T-junction, but we could only go left as the other direction was blocked by rubble. All the while with us moving underneath the city, we could hear the cries and screams up above from our comrades and the Russian soldiers. Explosions, bullet fire. It was chaotic. We knew that this was a death sentence. Hitler had no idea that the men he sent would end up in a meat grinder. We didn't know where to go, and we had no sense of direction, no understanding on how to fight this enemy. They were crazy as wild dogs. We knew that we were in their territory and they're fighting for their lives to defend their motherland. And honestly, it showed. I know that they can be quite crazy for sure, but you must have found an end to the canal after all. You are here alive. We did find the end, but... He stopped mid-sentence. I could see that he was visibly shaking already. I placed a hand on his shoulder and I tried to comfort him. Hey, it's okay, I'm right here. As we got closer to the end, we started to get sick. The stench was driving some of the men almost insane as he tried to hold his nose. Some of them didn't want to get any closer. But as we did, we noticed the water changing drastically. It was so murky and horrible. But in the end, we saw them. Just bodies littered, scattered all over the canal exit. We managed to recognize some of them as our own men. It seemed that, well, they died trying to exit. We weren't sure if it was wise to go out there, so one brave soul volunteered and ventured through, passing the dead bodies, and eventually managed to go through the exit. Lucky for him, it was clear. I didn't really say anything at this part. I was more or less trying to get grips on what he was telling me. Dead bodies, blood, the stench. This was to be expected. German soldiers trying to find a way to sneak through and attack the enemies from behind. But obviously, the enemy was a little too smart for that. I thought. We continued through and we held our breath. God, the stench was unbearable to cope with. It made everybody nauseous, but we managed to pull through. We couldn't do anything for them. Their bodies were just tossed and turned, limbs shredded, which seemed to have been from heavy caliber rounds. It was a bloodbath, but we had to keep going. We had a job to do. We were supposed to find Stalin, as we had been told that there was a bunker hidden somewhere close by near the canals, and so it was our job to locate it. A bunker? That makes sense. Hitler had one in Berlin, but he used it mostly during his briefings with his generals. But why were you tasked with finding it? Because we were the closest there and had another group looking for a possible exit. They were tasked to block the exit if they found it. We had to move in and find Stalin and either take him alive or dead. Further on, he explained to me how he had to go through various trenches, most of them filled with dead soldiers from both sides. Even had to fire back at some of them who tried to block the way. We pushed hard. We moved through all of this mud, gazing up at the dark sky to see our fighters fly above, being shot down one by the Russians' AA guns that were in the depths of the city. But we had some luck. We stumbled upon an entrance. To the bunker? Correct, but the bunker itself kind of caught us off guard. What do you mean? It was, well, pristine. No bullet holes, no chippings at the walls, and no marks. We didn't believe it. It didn't make any sense to us at all. How could a concrete bunker like this, especially in the city, surrounded by mountains of dirt, trenches, and dead bodies, be so clean? That is odd, I stated at this point. I started to feel a little bit out of my comfort zone here. In the back of my mind, I thought my great-grandfather was making this up. He must have. There was no way a bunker could be in pristine condition within a bloody war zone. But we didn't want to wait for so long in case we were spotted by our enemies, and so we went in. I left a couple of men behind who would keep the entrance covered for us, and to also stop Stalin if he managed to sneak past and go through that way, if the other end of the bunker wasn't blocked. We kept going down. We didn't realize how dark it was until we hit the first floor of the bunker. It was different in design compared to the bunkers that we were in before. The stairs were more open. If we leaned to the side, we could have looked all the way down to the last floor of the bunker. But because of how dark it was, all we could see was darkness. We all felt uncomfortable. We wanted to leave, but our legs more or less stopped us from doing so. We continued to go down, using some of our lighters and torches to try and see. The further we went down, the more uncomfortable it got. I'm starting to think that you're maybe over-elaborating on this, Grandpa. What makes you say that? I asked him. He looked at me with a deep gaze, almost wide-eyed, able to see some tears in his eyes. His expression is almost motionless at this point. It kind of scared me, to the point where I retrieved my hand from his shoulder. You would think it was a joke, wouldn't you? You didn't see what was down there. He yelled and I pulled back. This wasn't the reaction that I expected. Even the visitors in the park sort of looked at us with a puzzled expression. I hushed him for a moment, trying to calm him. Grandpa, I didn't mean it like that. Calm down, please. I was just saying, I've never heard something as weird as this, that's all. You think that they would share this in your history books? Do you remember what they said? History is written by the winners. This bunker is not what it seemed to be. We kept going down and down, and it felt like we were in there for hours on end. We couldn't even hear the noises from above. All we could hear was pure silence and the breathing from my comrades, as well as my heartbeat pounding against my chest. But the further we went down, the colder it became. We were so far down that we couldn't even see the light above. It was pitch black. We did find another entrance when we managed to hit the ground floor. A huge metal vault door. But it was half open, and it seemed that somebody had went through here. So we thought that this could potentially be Stalin having gone through. Thinking nothing of it, we carefully inspected the door and tried to move around it to the other side. And was he there? No. It only led to another long corridor, but at least it had some lights. Although quite dim, it was good enough for us to stop using ours. The tunnel was rather long and it felt like it would never end. But what we didn't realize were that the walls were closing the further we moved in. Wait, what? That's right. As we continued to walk down this long, dimly lit tunnel, it decreased in size, becoming smaller and smaller. We felt our helmets gradually scrape the ceiling and had to squish our arms to our sides just to move through. We thought that it was just a dead end, but it couldn't be. It was the only passable way that we found in the bunker that could lead us to Stalin's whereabouts. And as we got closer, I could see a dimly lit light on the other end. We turned our lights off completely so we could see. There was a hole just below. It looked like we could fit in it, but we needed to remove some gear to go through. We really wanted to head back, but we were too committed. My platoon lead would have had my head for this. As I was ready to move into the hole, I noticed some light flickering on the other side, noticing a shadow quickly fly past. That must have been him, so I crawled through. It was tight, but I and the others managed to get through it. I don't think I would have been able to go through all that. The tight tunnels, my claustrophobia would kill me. It was more spacious at the other side, and once everybody had made it through, we continued ahead. There was another junction. We looked both ways to see where we could head next, but everything was so dark or dimly lit, we couldn't see a thing. Even our flashlights began to die out on us, so we had no option but to use the walls to guide ourselves. I realized by now that the air was a bit more difficult to breathe in. Even the cold air was gone, replaced with a warmer temperature. This was all too weird for us, But for us, this may have been a sign that somebody is here to keep warm. So somebody must have made a fire. As we kept going, we heard something echoing in the darkness. A loud scream rattled the halls. We all prepped our weapons and we aimed down at the darkened corridor. We weren't too sure what to expect, so we decided to tread lightly and watched our surroundings. More screams erupted, but it wasn't anything close to a human. Perhaps it was a dog, but for even a dog it sounded weird. Now I'll say this. We all know about the secret projects that occurred during World War I and II. The V-2 rocket, the Nazi superhuman project, which was the Aryan project, the nuke. Various projects happened during that timescale. So originally, I thought that the Russians must have hidden something that they were working on. But hearing them talk about how they heard screams, they were rather unfamiliar. It kind of makes me uncomfortable. The more he explained, the more I can see him visibly shaking and tearing. To me, it seemed like he was in pain when he was telling me the story, and I felt so sorry for him. I honestly did, but I needed to know. I needed to know why he was so afraid that he had to deny telling me his side of the story. All this, every piece of his life during the war. It must have driven him mad. This may explain what drove his PTSD. I'm so sorry that you're in agony from telling me this, but you must understand. I just want to know why you're afraid. Please. People said that the Holocaust and that Stalingrad itself was a massacre. We thought that that was something that could cause a man to go insane. But nothing was worse than what we... But what? What did you see? It was just hell down there. We thought that we entered the gates of hell. I thought I was going to go insane. Grandpa. We continued to move on even if we didn't want to. Something was driving us. Something kept pulling us in further and further into the darkness. We became afraid. Some of the men wanted to retreat, but we just couldn't. The screams were loud. We heard bangs, metal being hit. And the closer we got, the louder it became. Until what? What happened and what did you see? Dead. Everything just dead. What? Our flashlights were on again. We went past another large metal vault door and we saw the dead. The stench of rotten flesh hitting our noses like a tidal wave. The floor was covered to the brim with blood, maggots, bits of flesh floating on top. God. He was shaking, and I just couldn't do anything other than drag him into a hug. My God, I said to him. We saw them all. Women, men, children. Ripped limbs, rats feasting on the flesh. Mountains of dead bodies piled in various locations in the hall. We heard faint groans coming from across the hall. It seemed like that some of them were alive, crying out for help. We were all stunned and we couldn't move at all, like we were frozen. One of the guys threw up all over themselves when we saw the bloody sight. Some even fainted from the sheer putrid smell that radiated off these poor people. We don't know who they are, and we couldn't help them. This bunker, it was a slaughterhouse, and the people in them were the pigs who were ready to be slaughtered. Jesus Christ. Stalin must have been the only person to do this. He had the power. He would kill his own people just to win the war. We just couldn't stop staring. Bones of various families, children dead, being gnawed at by the rats. Maggots infesting bodies. It was unbearable. Some seemed to be burned. Some chopped into pieces. We had to move. We didn't want to end up like them. We had to step through, over the piles of bodies just to find the exit. But you're here, so you had to find it, right? We did. They said that they saw Stalin enter the bunker, but we couldn't find him. The exit was easy to find, but the people beyond it were confused and shocked, seeing our winter clothes completely soaked in red. We couldn't explain it. We all sought to never tell this story to anyone. No one would have believed us in the first place, and I honestly just want to forget that it ever happened. I was stunned. I couldn't think of a thing to say to him. I wasn't sure how to process everything that I just heard. What happened there? What else is hidden from us? Is everything we've learned in our history books even real, or is it all a lie? This caused me to question everything about our centuries of human history. Nothing adds up, and those who had written these history books, what if they know the truth? Honestly, I'm scared to think that there could be more than what we presumably know.